It's been quite some time since we've done any kind of proper news update around the Final Fantasy franchise on this channel, and some pretty big topics have come and gone in that time. We unfortunately, as much as I wanted to, did not end up covering Tabata's resignation and the subsequent cancellation of the bulk of Final Fantasy XV Season 2 DLC, and it's with a significant amount of regret that we weren't able to devote any time towards the launch of Chocobo Run, a Brave Exvius spin-off title that released on Facebook towards the start of this year and has apparently amassed over 339,000 players. We've just been focusing on other things, but with so much commotion going on recently around the Final Fantasy VII Remake in relation to potential release windows and supposed reveal events, it felt like the right time to dive back into things with the hope of providing some, detailed scrutiny. As whenever the Final Fantasy VII Remake rears its head, everything seems to spiral pretty quickly out of control, and sometimes it's good to have a fire extinguisher handy. Truth be told, ever since the Final Fantasy VII Remake was announced to everyone's surprise on the big stage back at E3 2015, the next question, outside of what the gameplay was actually going to be like, was always, that's great and all, but when is this actually going to release? Because there's kind of some history here around Square Enix announcing things too early. The hope was that the turnaround time would be pretty quick, but here we are almost 4 years later, and we're in a slightly weird situation where we don't really know anything about the game at all, other than that development is supposedly progressing smoothly, and we certainly don't know when it's going to release. Nomura though did promise that once Kingdom Hearts 3 was released, the company's marketing and PR focus would shift towards the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and although he has said something to that tune before, numerous times actually, and each time without any kind of payoff afterwards, it looks like, based on what was discussed during a recent Square Enix earnings call, this time he may actually be telling the truth. The call took place well over a month ago now on the 5th of February, and at the time, Square Enix only released some high-level reference slides to the general public, which in isolation did not make for good reading. What they showed was a general decline in operating income that stretched all the way back to the start of their 2018 fiscal year and was compounded by some rather lackluster performance in Q3 from almost every division within the digital entertainment segment, which is made up of HD games, MMOs and smartphone and browser games. Wider media coverage was pretty damning, but I do feel as though it was a little bit harsh. If we're looking at Square Enix's performance from a more long-term view, from a financial perspective at least, the transformation under Yosuke Matsuda has been actually rather astounding, in a good way. I mean, just look at that growth, especially compared to the rocky road of the Yuichi Wada era. It should also be noted that despite this year not looking too positive, they did actually warn investors midway through last year that this was going to happen, forecasting a 21% reduction in operating income, with the nice carrot that they'd expect to excel in the following year to compensate with record operating income. They just didn't state how or why. To note, that following year starts on the 1st of April 2019 and runs through to the 31st of March 2020. If we then fast forward to the 19th of February, Square Enix released a full transcript of the earnings call, complete with questions fielded from investors. And from this, we gained some context around this year's declines, specifically that even though they had forecast that it wouldn't be as stellar as the previous year, things hadn't necessarily gone to plan. For example, we learned that although Shadow of the Tomb Raider and Just Cause 4 had indeed bolstered sales, Just Cause 4 had underperformed significantly, and this hadn't been expected by the business. They hoped that its December release would compensate for an expected drop in performance within their smartphone and browser game segment, and that it would also help to gloss over the extraordinary losses they suffered in relation to the change in focus for Lumina Studios. It meant that with everything else combined, they've been left with a significant 18.3 billion yen deficit to make up within Q4 of their financial year, and their overall target was 30 billion yen, so it's a very big hole to fill, even with Kingdom Hearts 3 setting the world on fire and the launch of a few other initiatives. It meant that investors were slightly worried, and they questioned if confidence was still high around not just hitting their target for this year, but also the lofty 40 to 50 million yen target they had set themselves for their 2020 fiscal year, which, as a reminder, was also set way back in the June 2018 earnings call that rounded out Square Enix's 2018 fiscal year. And this is where things start to relate to the Final Fantasy VII Remake, as Square Enix noted in their response to that specific question that although they may struggle to achieve their target for this year, their projections for next year have not changed. But they were reticent to detail how exactly they're going to achieve the target, which would ultimately be record results for the company, refusing to disclose any new details about their upcoming release schedule for the next 12 months. What's interesting is that when they announced their 40 to 50 billion yen target, nobody batted an eyelid. But now that it's much closer, with Square Enix's 2020 fiscal year starting in just a few weeks and running through until the 31st of March 2020, it's led to some speculation about how exactly are they going to achieve this. And this is mainly because to generate those kind of results, there needs to be some upturn from within their digital entertainment division, Square Enix's primary source of revenue. And if we then look into the digital entertainment division, then it's unlikely that this upturn will come from the previously very lucrative smartphone and browser game division, as Square Enix have been struggling in this area as of late. Many of their recent launches just haven't resonated with gamers, and as a result they've been having to spend money to try and capture new audiences while also developing more experiences. But let's say we're being optimistic. This year's poor performance was a blip on the radar, and next year things will return more in line with what we've seen in the past 3 years. Which then leads us on to the MMO division, which will likely see a decent boost in performance next year due to the release of Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. It's one of the few titles we know of that actually has a release date right now. When the 2 previous expansions launched, income in this segment almost doubled. So with that in mind, the MMO division should see similar performance next year if all goes to plan. Based on these 2 scenarios and then taking into account potential eliminations and costs, this then means that to achieve their lofty goal of 40 billion yen operating income, the HD game segment needs to achieve roughly the same amount of figures that were achieved in their 2018 fiscal year, which again for reference ran from the 1st of April 2017 through to the 31st of March 2018, and saw Square Enix achieve an operating income of 38.1 billion yen, only 1.9 billion yen shy of their lower target for next year. There were numerous releases within this period, such as Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age, Dissidia NT, Lost Sphere, and Life is Strange Before the Storm. Final Fantasy XV also launched on PC alongside the Royal Edition, as did Final Fantasy IX and Chrono Trigger, and the Secret of Mana remake released alongside Star Ocean The Last Hope Remastered. But the big one was by far Dragon Quest XI. And Nier Automata would have definitely helped despite launching a few weeks before the end of the previous fiscal year. It means the coming year needs to match this. And looking at what's coming up, that we know of at least, well, it's kind of limited and it's difficult to see how that's actually going to be possible. Final Fantasy X, X-2 HD Remaster and Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age are due to release in April on the Nintendo Switch and Xbox One, and Dragon Quest Builders 2 is due to release in the West on the 12th of July. These should see decent sales, as should Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Remastered and Oninaki, the latest game from Tokyo RPG Factory, both of which should release at some point over the next 12 months. But that's about all we know about their plans for this year within the HD game segment. And if we're looking at the pipeline, then it's clear the boost in income has to come from somewhere else. Babylon's Fall, the upcoming game from Platinum Games, and Project Prelude Room, the new game from Studio Istolia, are potentials, but unless Square Enix's marketing divisions do something amazing with them, or they've just got something monumental under wraps that's going to make everyone sit up and take notice almost immediately upon its announcement, the only other known games capable of generating sales on the level of Kingdom Hearts 3, Dragon Quest XI, or Final Fantasy XV are whatever they have planned with the Avengers project, and of course the elusive Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's clear they're gearing up to release something big, and some financial analysts such as David Gibson, who was actually on the earnings call back on the 5th of February, believe that the something big is the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and that they will announce the release date during or just before this year's E3, which I'd say is a very logical conclusion. In the past few years, Square Enix has indeed chosen to drop major announcements before E3, and last year, Kingdom Hearts 3's release date was announced in this way. The year before, Dissidia NT was given the same treatment, and this has been pretty common for a while now. Final Fantasy XV's original release date was announced 6 months prior at the Uncovered event, and even going back to Final Fantasy XIII, when release dates were staggered around the world, they announced the Western release date 5 months before its eventual launch. Should the announcement indeed happen around E3, as many are predicting, then that would naturally be extremely exciting, and the next question then immediately relates to when the prospective release date will actually be. I've seen a lot of people saying it could arrive during Q3 of Square Enix's fiscal year due to the /3 on their earnings report, but that doesn't actually mean Q3, it's just how Japanese companies denote their entire fiscal year. And with that in mind, I'd say it's actually more logical for the launch to happen right at the start of next year, 2020. It's when they typically like to release big Final Fantasy games within the Western market, and based on recent history, the Western arm of Square Enix would also likely block any release in December due to its clash with the festive season, as they did with Kingdom Hearts 3. With the exception of Final Fantasy XV, which was initially planned to release in September, it's also uncommon for them to release Japanese-centric games in November in the West, but that's all working on the assumption that they try to do another simultaneous release. They had issues with this approach when they released Final Fantasy XV, and they had similar issues with Kingdom Hearts 3, and in response, Nomura voiced concerns about whether he'd actually want to do it again this way. If that's the case, and they do move away from it, then there are options. It could, for example, launch in Japan during late November or early December, something that's been quite common over the years, and this would then be followed up by a Western launch happening towards the start of next year. Another option Nomura proposed was that they could choose to release the digital version of the game simultaneously, but only release the boxed version in Japan at the same time. The Western boxed version would then be delayed to avoid people stealing it or selling it early and leaking details online. Either way, it's all extremely exciting, and if it is indeed what they've been planning for the past year and a bit, then I genuinely hope that everything pans out well for them. As I mentioned though, often when there's news or speculation relating to the Final Fantasy VII Remake, everything starts to spiral a bit out of control. And that's the case with the supposed uncovered Final Fantasy VII Remake event that was accidentally tweeted about by Square Enix before they hastily removed it. To cut right to the chase, this, from what I can see, is 100% fake. And the fact it got so much traction is a bit unfortunate. You don't even have to dig too deep to realise it either, because the Twitter timeline for the official Square Enix account is different from what the screen cap suggested. Square Enix posted a tweet about Dissidia NT Free Edition at 5 AM UK time, and this, according to the screen cap, was followed by the uncovered tweet 6 hours later. Except Square Enix made another tweet about Final Fantasy IX releasing on Xbox One and Switch only 3 hours after the Dissidia NT tweet. Oops. I mean, it would be pretty cool if Square Enix did in fact host another event like this, but it doesn't feel like there would be any need for them to do so. With Final Fantasy XV, they had to try and re-engage people after 8 years of crazy shenanigans dating all the way back to its days as Final Fantasy Versus 13. They needed to build some bridges, and some were thanks to the active time reports and FaceTime with Tabata due to appearances at conventions like PAX and Gamescom. But the final cherry on the top was to throw huge amounts of cash at a massive party to announce a release date, and it was awesome, even if they then failed to meet that release date. With the Final Fantasy VII Remake, they don't need to do any of that, let alone engaging with the fanbase, as continued demand from the fanbase is pretty much the entire reason this game is being made to begin with. And given the sheer level of consistent interest, as denoted by IGN Italy actually even posting about this ridiculous rumour just to try and get some clicks, it just shows you how powerful this game is and how significant it will be for Square Enix when it launches. The first part at least will sell, no matter how good it ends up being and no matter when it does eventually end up releasing. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to this Final Fantasy VII Remake news update. As mentioned right at the start of the video, it's been quite a long while since we've covered any major news relating to the franchise on this channel, and it felt good to dive back into things, and I'm sure there will be more opportunities to delve into news with E3 coming up so soon, especially if the release date does indeed end up being announced. On that note, when do you guys think it will now release? Post your predictions in the comments below. And if you like this video, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. We're always looking to continue to produce interesting and insightful content around this glorious franchise. We've got some really cool irons in the fire right now relating to battle music and an Origins video from a game we've not yet featured. Any support you can offer in this regard is of course very much appreciated, and we'd love to have you along for the ride. One way you can support outside of watching, liking and sharing our videos is via Patreon. You can support us there for as little as $1 per month. If you'd like to go a little bit further though, we have other tiers available, and for $5 per month, you'll gain access to behind the scenes content. So far, we've given insight into our script writing and video editing processes, and there's so much more for us to share in this format. We also like to give shoutouts to our wonderful Patreon community, the Monk Squad, via credits at the end of our videos, and if you'd like to find out more, please check out the link in the description below. Alright guys, this is Daryl signing out. Thank you all again for watching. I'll see you next time for more Final Fantasy videos.